Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the final edition of the 22-23 Know to Prevent virtual speaker series. For those of you joining us for the first time, Know to Prevent is a collaboration of youth-focused coalitions and agencies in Westchester working together to provide parents with the essential tools to increase resilience and reduce risky behaviors among our youth. For more information on the collaborative and access to the recordings of previous presentations, please visit www.knowtoprevent.org. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Tonight's presentation is being recorded, and all participants will receive a link to the recording along with a handout called the tip jar. The tip jar will highlight key takeaways, information, and prompts from tonight's speaker for everyone to have as a reference. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation, so we encourage you to put any questions you may have during the presentation into the Q&A box in Zoom. At this time, I'd like to introduce one of our lead coalition sponsors, Kathy Cucciarella, the Coalition Coordinator for Somers Partners in Prevention. Kathy?
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, and good evening, everyone. I'm Kathy Cucciarella from the Somers Partners in Prevention. I am the chairperson and drug-free communities coordinator for the coalition. We are located in Somers, New York, and our coalition has been in existence for over 50 years. So I think that's a very interesting fact. Our mission is to build a safer community by efficiently addressing alcohol and drug use, as well as other risk-taking behaviors through advocacy, hope, and awareness. We're a community alliance to help our youth and communities stay alcohol and drug-free. Somers Partners in Prevention is proud to be one of the sponsoring coalitions in the Know to Prevent collaborative. We are thrilled to bring valuable speakers and informative sessions to the parents, caregivers, and teachers in our communities throughout Westchester County. Tonight's featured speaker is Michelle Eichard, and her talk, The Essential Parenting Conversations and How to Have Them. Michelle is a speaker, author, and educator who helps kids, parents, and teachers navigate the complicated social world of early adolescence. Her latest book, 14 Talks by Age 14, guides readers through 14 essential conversations parents need to have with their kids before they start high school. Her first book, Middle School Makeover, Improving the Way You and Your Child Experience the Middle School Years, is a primer for the social and emotional changes parents and kids navigate when midlife meets middle school under one roof. She's currently writing her third book, The 10 Failures That Can Make Your Child a Success. Michelle is a CNN parenting writer and a member of the Today Show parenting team. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, CNN, Time, and People magazine. Her middle school leadership programs, Athena's Path and Hero's Pursuit, have been implemented at schools across the country. And she speaks around the globe at schools and parenting events. So I would like to welcome tonight, Michelle Eichard. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone who's here. I know it's really tough to get together on a Zoom after a long day, and I'm always grateful when you spend a little time with each other and with me talking about how to communicate with kids. So what we are going to do tonight, I'm going to share my slideshow in just a moment, but just a sort of introductory note. As you know, this is my latest book, 14 Talks by Age 14. I will say that if you are on here and you have a child who is younger than 14 or older than 14, don't worry. The examples in the book are pretty middle school centric, but the tips and the strategies and the science that we're going to talk about tonight are really relevant regardless of the age of your child. And in fact, one of the nicest things that's happened since writing the book is that I've received really great emails from people saying, this is working on my partner, or this is working with my coworkers. So anyone who may be a sensitive listener is someone who this will benefit. So thank you again for being here. I am going to share my slides, and then we'll spend just under an hour probably talking through the presentation. And then, as you heard, we're going to have some time for Q&A, and I love Q&A. So I am excited for you to ask me questions. And I know we've already received quite a few really interesting questions prior to the event. So away we go. Okay. I like to start here in what I call the middle school construction project. Again, it's a bit of a misnomer. I call it that because this project begins in middle school, roughly at about age 11 in early adolescence. But like every construction project, it takes much longer to complete than you really think initially. So this is about the project that your child undergoes at the beginning of adolescence and throughout. So your child may be working on this project certainly through high school, partially through college, maybe even a little bit beyond. But I am very interested in the middle school age and sort of the onset of this. So what is this project that begins in middle school? It's really about your child transitioning from being a, pardon me, a dependent young person into a person who is trying to become independent. And so they are working on building 3 things that they need in order to be an adult. And when I am in an auditorium full of parents, I will often ask, and I'll say, what do you think your kid needs to become an adult? What do they have to start building? And I'll often hear things, parents will raise their hand and they'll say, oh, they need to be more responsible, or they need to be financially independent, or they need to be really good at relationships with other people, or they need to be curious about how the world works. And I say, those are great qualities. And I agree, they are ones that make for a really good adult. But do you know an adult who's irresponsible? Or do you know an adult who is not really good at interpersonal relationships, or who's not really good at managing their money, these kinds of things? And of course, the answer is yes. We all know people who don't fulfill those qualities, and they are still technically adults. So while those are things that we want your kids to be working on as they go through adolescence, and certainly as they get older, at the onset, they are really working on building 3 things that are far more foundational and that will help them build those other skills and qualities and characteristics later on. So the 3 things that your child begins to build at the beginning of adolescence are an adult body. They need an adult body to be an adult. They need an adult brain. And it's not really that they're just have to come up with a whole new brain, but there's so much restructuring that happens in order for them to have a brain that functions in the adult world and can manage adult tasks and adult thinking. Adult body, adult brain, and adult identity. This one is my favorite. So I'll take a step back and say the body piece, I'm happy to talk about if you have a question about it, but it's not something that I spend a lot of time on in my work. And that's for a couple reasons. One is there are so many people who do it really well, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And I'm happy to refer you to them if you're curious. But there are lots of people who are studying and talking about puberty and doing a great job of it. So that's one reason. Another is it's kind of linear. Even though puberty starts at different times for different kids, it's fairly predictable for most kids that you can say, okay, this is happening. So we know based on this book that I read that this is probably going to happen next in this roughly this amount of time. And so again, starts at different times for different kids, but it follows a fairly predictable path. And then you can pretty much see it happening. I mean, not totally, but you see your kid go through a growth spurt, or you notice, wow, their voice is getting deeper, or they're developing. And so we feel a little bit more reassured and more comforted because it's a highly covered topic, it's a little bit more visible, and it's a little bit more linear. I find that the other 2 pieces of this construction project are the ones that tend to derail parents and kids, but really parents a little bit more. So I'm going to talk more about those. We did body, the other is an adult brain. I'm going to spend a minute talking about that. I know that a lot of parenting writers and scientists talk about the adult brain and what happens, but I am particularly interested in the changes that happen in your child's brain throughout adolescence that make it hard to talk to them. And that's really what the focus of this book is about. How can we work with the biology and neurology and the emotions that are happening at this age so that we can continue to have conversations at a time when your kid is pulling away and doesn't want to talk and doesn't want to listen. So I'll cover that in a moment. And then the adult identity piece. This is truly my favorite of the 3. So what do I mean by developing an adult identity? Really, at its most basic definition, what I mean is they are developing an identity apart from you. So in elementary school, all the things that we do as adults, you and I, that are sort of hallmarks of how we present ourselves to the world? Who do we choose to be friends with? What do we wear? How do we like to present ourselves to the world? What are our hobbies and interests? Where do we donate our money? What are our, what charities do we support? What are our beliefs? All of these things are things that we decided for our children primarily through elementary school. So we said, here are the clothes in your closet. You can choose from these. Or we said, you're having a play date on Saturday with Katie because I like Katie's mom and I want to have coffee with her. So, and you two seem to get along. So that should be fine. Or we say, you need an activity, you're not doing much right now. Our family's kind of packed with stuff. I hope you like horseback riding because it's Sunday afternoons and that's when we have a window. So we tend to choose these hallmarks of identity for our kids when they're younger. At the beginning of the middle school construction project, your child will feel a real drive to start to choose these things for themselves, who they are friends with, how they are presenting themselves to the world, how they spend their time, what activities they're interested in. And that piece I'm fascinated by, and I think it ties in really tightly with how your child relates to you during these years because they are pulling away. It is their job to individuate. They need to separate and become a person who is independent from you. It takes a long time. So years and years and years, all the way through adolescence, but they have to begin practicing this at an early age. So we are going to talk about that quite a bit tonight as well. Okay, I want to talk about something that is really related to this middle school construction project, and it's fear. If I ask you, what do you think is the number one fear of teens and tweens? Again, if I'm in an auditorium and I sort of poll people, I'll hear things like not fitting in, not being popular, not being liked, not having friends. And that is all correct. This is a huge fear for kids this age. The word that I have heard most often in my work is not being normal. So if you think about that in terms of this middle school construction project, you've got a changing body, a changing brain, and a changing identity or sense of self. There is no manual, there's no TV show, there's no book out there that tells you whether your construction project is progressing as it should, or whether you're kind of behind or you're going off the rails. Really, the only way that kids can have a sense of whether they feel normal, quote unquote, normal, is by looking around. And so they make a lot of comparisons between themselves and everyone else. And they'll say, wow, a lot of girls in my grade are wearing bras now, and I'm not wearing a bra. Am I not normal? Or a lot of guys got really tall over the summer and I didn't. I'm the shortest guy in the class. Am I not normal? Or so it's like body questioning stuff. And then we have the brain stuff. Wow, some of these kids are doing really well in middle school. They're able to juggle classes and multiple projects, and I'm overwhelmed and I don't know how to do what they're doing. Am I not normal? Why can't I do that? Or the identity piece. Some of these kids want to start dating each other, and I still like playing with my dolls or my Legos or hanging out with my parents. Is something wrong with me? So they are facing their fear, their kind of number one top rated fear all day, every time they walk down the hallway, every time they're on a Zoom with their peers, every time they go into a cafeteria or a classroom, or they're on social media. They are questioning whether or not their middle school construction project is progressing normally. And if you think about this in the context of your own life and your own fear, take a moment and think about what your worst fear is. Maybe it's spiders, maybe it's death, maybe, there are polls of adults that show that the number one most commonly ranked fear among adults is public speaking, and number two is death. I always find that funny. But whatever yours is, think about it for a moment. What's your worst fear? And what if all day, every day, you focused on that? You thought about it. It was brought up around you. You had to deal with it constantly until you got home at the end of the day. You'd be exhausted. It's utterly exhausting to think about your worst fear all the time. So I say that because there's a lens of sort of compassion that we need to bring to kids at an age when sometimes they are tough to like, when they are being contrarians and they are rebellious and they are separating from you and they don't want to spend time with you. It can be difficult to remember our compassion for all the things that they're going through, in particular, the things that we won't ever see, the stuff that's happening, in their brains and in their hearts and at school. And so I like to sort of keep that as the lens through which we look at all the stuff that's happening with kids this age. Okay, very rudimentary graphic here so that we can talk about what's happening in your tween or teen's developing brain, particularly as it relates to communication. So we've got 3 areas of the brain here that I want to talk about, and I give them all nicknames because I am not a doctor. It's easier for me, might be easier for you to think about things this way, sort of metaphorically. So we have the frontal lobe, or the prefrontal cortex, and we know that that is responsible for a lot of the kind of administrative duties of your child's brain. So when I talk to kids, I say it's like the manager of your favorite store, Starbucks or H&M, wherever you like to go. And their job is to solve problems that come up. And their job is to make sure that nothing bad happens and to keep everyone safe in the store. And, the kind of things that manage the money, all of that stuff that a manager would be responsible for. And then we have the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. I call it the hot seat. So it's where all the emotions and drama and things that a lot of people sort of associate with early adolescence, where that lives. And then the temporal lobe, which I refer to as the flash drive. For years, I referred to it as a file cabinet until kids were kind of like, the what? Like, it's just not a very common metaphor for them anymore. So it's a flash drive. And essentially, it's where things that your child is learning are stored. And twice in your kid's life, they are learning so much new information. That flash drive has to purge some things in order to make room for new ideas and new concepts and new ways of learning. It happens at around age 2. And it happens again at around age 11, when your child begins to make the shift from concrete to hypothetical thinking. So a young child is pretty crystal clear on what's right and wrong, and things are very kind of black and white for them. When kids enter adolescence, they develop the ability to think about things with more nuance, things that are less concrete, more hypothetical. It's why you see a huge interest in social justice for kids this age. Things become just very compelling in the gray area. That is so good, and also can be so frustrating, because you will find that your child becomes sort of like a bad little lawyer, where truth becomes a little bit blurry. What's true and what's not. We see a huge increase in lying for kids this age in early adolescence, and it's because their mind is open to hypothetical thinking. So on the plus side, they can learn algebra. A young kid would say, no, X is not a number. I know what a number is. It's 1 through whatever, but don't try to fool me. X is not a number. A kid who's in early adolescence is willing to believe things that are less concrete. Oh, suddenly X can represent a number. So that's cool. You can start teaching them about things that are a little bit more elevated, complex. On the other hand, they're not good at it yet, right? They're just practicing. So they're working through with their training wheels on. And that means that you have kids who start to sort of fudge around with this and press back on you and on what you believe and on what you think, and also on the truth, and figure out where the gray area is for that. So that's the flash drive, the temporal lobe. It's going to come into play a lot as you're communicating with your child. And then I want to talk for a moment about the manager. You may know that the prefrontal, you hear people say all the time, oh, their brains aren't fully developed until they're in their 20s. So don't let them do X, Y, or Z because the brain isn't fully developed. The brain restructures during this time of life. They are developing so many new neurons and new synapses and things that will help them be a stronger critical thinker when they are an adult, a better problem solver, all the things we want for our kids to be. But while that area is restructuring, this is what I say happens to the manager. The manager sort of takes a lunch break, right? They're rebuilding, restructuring, and so they have to go to the back of the store and eat a sub for 10-ish years. And while that happens, there's a job opening. This amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, starts to perform some of the functions that our brains would call on the manager for. But since the manager is not available during this time, the amygdala says, "Oh, pick me, pick me. I would love to be in charge. I'm so excited by this." The amygdala loves excitement. So it's very happy to step in at this phase of life and say, let me start to make some of the decisions. And it's why we see a real increase in emotionality and also impulsivity. And kids begin to do things without slowing down and thinking about them critically. They are just driven by a real need to satisfy that part of their brain that wants to be in charge. What this means is that your child needs a really good assistant manager. So the assistant manager is probably you. That is someone who can be a great listener, who can help your child as they practice. You don't want to just jump in and do everything for your child. We don't say, oh gosh, well, the front of their brains aren't working and they're thinking really emotionally, so I better stay in control right now. They need a lot of time to practice critical thinking, to practice problem solving. So your job is to be a great assistant manager during this time and to help them through this. As you think about this, I think this is a very helpful exercise. Think about the worst boss you ever had. So who's the worst person you ever worked for? It may have been when you were a teenager. I hope it's not now. It may be a teacher you had, but someone who was very hard to perform well for. And then think about what made that person so hard to work for. And when I ask parents to do this activity with me, I will often hear things like, "You're a really bad communicator. I never quite knew what they wanted from me." Or they were really emotional. If I did something that was, wrong, they would cry or yell or take it so personally. Sometimes they'll say they were too checked out. I just didn't know what was expected of me, right? They didn't have any respect for work-life balance. So I felt like I always had to be working and there was no time to rest. You see where I'm going with this, probably. If you take a moment, sometime tonight, and you want to do this activity, I think you'll come up with a list of things that make a person really hard to work for. I can tell you that the most popular answer when I do this activity in a room with a lot of parents, the most popular answer is micromanager. A micromanager is the hardest person to work for. So our instincts are often, oh my gosh, my child's brain isn't fully developed. I need to clamp down. And I need to micromanage this because they can't do a very good job. And if any of you have worked for a micromanager before, I would wager that you would say you did not do your best. That was not your best performance when you were being micromanaged. So I encourage you, as you think about your role of assistant manager, to do the exercise when you have a moment. It's also in the book. And then to flip that. And you can write yourself a really good job description for being a parent to tweens and teens by coming up with that list of what made a person really hard to work for and then flipping it. And we will talk about this a little bit later as we're talking more about communication. I want to talk for a moment about risk-taking. And I know that that will be sort of a huge interest to this audience in particular because of the nature of the work that you do and that you support in your communities. Again, our impulse is to say, oh, this is a time when kids are being exposed to too much. Suddenly there are parties. Suddenly there are cell phones and social media and strangers and all kinds of things that are terrifying. And so I need to keep them safe. And we presume often that the way that we keep them safe is by clamping down on those things around them. To some degree, yes, but to some degree, no. And I want to talk about that because it is not an intuitive thing at all. I want to talk for a second about the work of Lawrence Steinberg. If you're not familiar with it, he did a very interesting research study where he wanted to figure out why teenagers take so many risks. Why are they so impulsive? Why so many car accidents, for example, when, what can we be doing to sort of help kids during this time? And his initial assumption was that teens and tweens take so many risks because they're not good at analyzing risk. like we as adults are. We're pretty good at saying that's probably not a good idea. It might not go well. And so his first assumption was tweens probably can't do that the same way that we do. So he put adults on a video game simulator and had them drive across town, and you were awarded points if you got there quickly. And if you didn't have traffic violations, if you had violations, points were deducted. So if you ran a light or crashed your car. And then he had teens do the same thing, had a teen do the driving simulator. If they got there quickly, they got more points, but if they had traffic violations, points were deducted. And what he found is that teens and adults scored very similarly. So that led him to understand that teens really did know when they should slow down for a yellow light, for example, not to try to race through that light, to get there quickly, hoping that they could get more points for getting there fast, knowing that they might actually get a violation for running the yellow light. They could do that. And so that stumped him. So then he had another round of the experiment where he had an adult watch the adult drive, and they performed the same. And then he had a teen watch the teen drive, and that's where the wheels kind of fell off. And kids started crashing, and they started running stop signs and lights in a real effort to get there quickly to the end and hopefully get the highest score. What he learned from this is that teens really can evaluate risk in the same way that we do. What they do differently from adults is they overvalue reward. And in particular, they overvalue social reward. So again, in the context of that middle school construction project, that third piece, developing an adult identity, that means pulling away from you. And that means finding themselves for the first time in their lives, feeling a little bit lonely and a little bit scared and a little bit uncertain about their future. They know that you are not their future. They know that you are a very nice launching pad for them, but that in their future, adults find jobs through each other. They marry each other. They partner with each other. They support each other. They have friendships with each other. And that is how things work societally and culturally. So even if they can't articulate it, they are driven biologically to separate from us. And then it creates this feeling of fear. Like, now I'm out here and I'm not with my parents, and I'm starting to question whether I can do this. So that creates a vacuum for kids, and they are desperate to find comfort and community with each other because they know that that really is where their future is, right? So this need to impress each other, to be likable, to feel, again, back to that biggest fear, to feel normal and accepted among their peers, drives them to do things that we think are absurd or insane or unsafe. And if they could be totally honest with you, and for example, if your child jumped off of a shed and they broke their leg, and you said, why in the world would you do that? You see how high that is. You know that you could have broken your leg. I don't know why you would have done that. If they were being honest, they would say, yeah, I knew that I could have gotten hurt. But if I didn't get hurt, it would have been epic. People would have been talking about this for so long. Like, I would have been so cool. And that has higher value for them. So because kids are driven to take risks at this age, the best way to keep them safe is not by removing risk. The more we micromanage, the more we clamp down on kids and we say, oh no, it's too scary, I've got to keep them safe, they're too impulsive, the more they go underground because they feel a real need to do things that feed that amygdala, the emotional need, and feed that identity development piece of separating from you and becoming their own person, and feed the need for acceptance among their peers. So if we clamp down too much, kids take risks that are more dangerous. They go into darker, less safe places to do it. Now, your child's brain is not good at knowing what's a good risk and what's a bad risk. So there are plenty of good risks that your kids can be taking at this age. I'm going to give you a very quick example of one from my own family. When my son was in 7th grade, he wanted to start a business where he would buy shoes off the internet, clean them up, and resell them at a profit. And I hated this. I hated it for several reasons. He was a kid who $1 burned a hole in his pocket. So I thought he was doomed to fail and lose money on this. I hated it because he would have to sell his product to strangers. And I was very uncomfortable with him doing that. And I hated it because it was gross. And I thought these gross shoes are going to arrive at my house and he's going to touch them and clean them up and, all of this. So that's one that I easily could have just said, no, you're not doing that. It's not going to end well. I can see clearly how it's not going to end well. So pick something else. Go play basketball, right? I could have taken that approach. And I think often we do because we're exhausted and we don't understand that there's huge value in the risk taking itself, even if the venture is doomed to fail, because your child doesn't recognize what's a good risk and what's a bad risk. They are driven to take risks, but your child's brain is equally satisfied by both. So if we allow them to take more risks that make us a little bit uncomfortable, but that are not devastating, like the shoe sales business, then our kids' brains say, okay, good. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing developmentally. I'm starting to take risks. I'm pulling away. I'm excited. I'm satisfying the need for thrill. And then they don't need to find that in other areas. So for example, with the shoe business, I said, okay, we set some parameters. Like I had to be there. He set up a little Instagram account. He was mostly selling to kids at other schools. It was that kind of thing, but still, he was not allowed to do a sale unless I was there. We were in the parking lot of our grocery store. I did not stand right next to him because he found that mortifying, but I was standing nearby, right? So that was one of the rules. So this happened for a little while. He started making some money. He was very excited. And then he wanted to go to a shoe expo with his best friend and they wanted to rent a table. And they were going to put all the shoes that they had bought and cleaned up on the table and sell them there amongst all these other adults who had legit businesses and were selling shoes. I really didn't want him to do that. It made me very uncomfortable. But he said, please, I'm going to go with his friend. Please let me do it. So in 7th grade, he went to the shoe expo. I dropped him off. I went home. He got robbed. It was not a terrible act. It was not a violent act. But just as I sort of predicted in my mind, some person came by, grabbed a bunch of shoes off the table and took off. And there was nothing these 2 7th grade boys could do about it. So it didn't end particularly well. But again, the success of the venture is not really what we're after here. What we're after is satisfying that need to take risks. So what I say to parents in terms of risk taking, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. So what I'd like you to do is sort of tiptoe to the edge of your comfort zone and then take 2 more steps and look for ways, and your child will tell you what these ways are. Look for ways that they can stretch themselves. Risk is really subjective. So you can't say, well, I signed my child up for lacrosse or football or got them skateboarding lessons or whatever it may be. That may sound thrilling to you. It may be thrilling to some kids, but unless it's creating that feeling, when you get on a roller coaster and you are excited, but you're also terrified, you need to look for that. That's the feeling that you want your child to have, not just why play sports, check, but I have a little bit of terror here. And it's so subjective that I always get this question. Parents will say, well, should I be worried? Because I have a kid who doesn't do anything. Oh, they don't seem to take any risks. So now what does that mean? You might have a child like me. I was a child who was so shy and so nervous that asking someone to borrow a pencil in school took it out of me. So you may have a kid who's like, well, I talked to someone at school who who was intimidating and made me nervous, and they've checked that box. Don't worry if you are not seeing it loud at a shoe expo. It may be happening in another way, but talk to your kids and figure out what's causing that sort of excitement and fear and try to embrace that as much as you're able. That is one of the best ways we can keep our kids safe at an age when they are starting to be exposed to more and more dangerous things. Take a quick water sip. Okay, so how do we talk to our kids about all of this stuff when they don't want to talk to us anymore? Right? As they enter adolescence, they stop listening. They stop being interested in what we have to say. They are embarrassed by what we have to say. They assume what we have to say is wrong. And they just don't want to talk or listen. So I say in the book, it's time to learn a new language. Everything is new at this point in your child's life. New body, new brain, new sense of self, new identity. So a new way of talking to them will not seem weird. It's not going to be like, this is coming out of left field. Everything is at this point. So don't worry if you need to completely change the way you have related to your child up to this point. That's a perfectly natural adjustment to make, and it's one that I want you to make. So we are going to talk about how you do that. I say in the book, just as the job of language is to tie groups together, the job of tweens is to break ties apart. So language is one of the first things that gets sacrificed. I want you to know that it's perfectly normal. If your child doesn't want to listen to you anymore, it's not an indication that you're not a good parent or that they aren't going to like you down the road. It's naturally the first thing to go, communication, because their job is to sever a tie and to start finding ties with their peers. Incidentally, and I just find this kind of cool, it's why we see slang develop during adolescence, because it is a way of coding language and communication that says, this is our group and how we talk, and you don't need to understand it because you're over there, and this is for us. Okay, I'm going to give you sort of the greatest hits of things that do and don't work well. The book has a bunch of these. They're in every chapter for every topic. So the book covers everything from how do you talk about the loss of creativity when screens are so prevalent, to topics that are probably more intimidating or scary, like drugs, like sex, things like that, like suicide. So there are universal do's and don'ts in the book, and then there are really specific ones for each category. I'm going to go over a couple of the universal ones right now for talking to your kids that are part of this process of developing a new language, a new way of approaching them. So we'll cover the don'ts first. First is don't appear needy. We tend to crave our kids more when they're pulling away. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. And so a lot of times we are yearning for our kids to talk, and we become needy of them. And as a reminder, they are exhausted from all of this construction work that is going on in their brain, body, and identity, all the stuff that's happening among their peers all day. And so when they come to us at the end of a day and we are desperate for information from them, they are put off, they are further exhausted. So if you can, this is jumping over to a to-do, but one of the things that I find works best is, instead of when your kid comes in the door, you're sort of grasping for information, scheduling a time to talk works really great for kids this age. So you might say, hey, good to see you. I hope you had a great day. Grab a snack. I want to hear about your math test, or I'd love to hear what happened at school today, but I can't right now because I have a couple emails that I have to get out before I forget about them. So maybe we can touch base after dinner. And you will see kids just sort of, and a lot of times they'll say, well, now's okay. I can tell you right now, which is great. That's awesome. Or if you really do want to send those emails, then that's fine. You can say, I'm so happy you want to talk. Let's talk for a minute. And then I really do need to do the emails, but let's set up a time to talk after dinner. I'm dying to hear about everything. Kids really like that. So don't appear needy. Don't be passive aggressive. I am telling you this one because it is me. A lot of these things I have firsthand experience with. My kids are older now. My kids are 19 and 21. So, but when they were in middle school, I struggled with not feeling appreciated. I was juggling a lot, a career and household stuff. And it was beyond frustrating to me when I went the extra mile. If I cooked a dinner that I was, took some effort and I was happy about it, and I put it on the table, and one of my kids said, oh, chicken. I mean, I was so passive aggressive. I would be like, oh, fine. Okay. You know what, then I don't have to cook. You can make dinner for yourself. If you know what you want and I'm not getting it right. It's terrible, but kids have a tendency of really pushing our buttons at this time. Take a deep breath. If you are like me and you are quick to jump to this one, take a deep breath and just tell your child how you feel. There is no need to come at this from an angle. No child ever, when I said, oh, fine, okay, you can cook yourself dinner then, I guess I'm off duty. No kid ever said, oh, Mom, I've just had an epiphany. You're right. I have been treating you badly. I'm not being grateful. Never, ever, ever. So just tell them how you feel. Just say, gosh, that hurts my feelings. I worked hard on this. And if you do that, it's disarming and it's honest. And it's a really good way of modeling how to be a better communicator. Your children are likely to respond much better. And then the third don't is don't be too vague and don't be too absolute. And I'll explain what I mean. Don't be too vague about things. By the time your child is entering middle school, euphemisms are no longer necessary, particularly when you're talking about sex, when you're talking about body stuff, whatever that may be. Your child is being exposed to all of this in one way or another. Even if you say, but my child doesn't have social media, or my child goes to a very conservative school, or whatever it is, for sure they are being exposed to it among their peers in one way or another. And there is a lot of research that shows that kids say they wish their parents had been more specific with them. So you don't have to talk with them, sit down for an hour and cover everything all at once. In fact, we're going to talk about the technique for kind of getting in and out quickly here. I'd love for you to have lots of little conversations that are really specific about any of the tough topics that you find that you need to address with them. And the absolutes are really about kind of your basic communications 101, not using terms like never and always. And again, I think because our kids tend to push our buttons during adolescence, probably related to the passive aggressiveness a little bit, we get fed up and we say things like, oh, I always put your stuff on the stairs for you to take up and you never do. It sits there for so long. And again, your child is developing this really wonderful ability to think about things in a more hypothetical, a less concrete, a more nuanced way. So that little lawyer in them is going to say always and never are red flag words, and they're going to argue with you and debate because they will remember a time when they did carry their stuff up off the stairs. You'll get lost in that. So instead of trying to argue those points, again, it goes back to tell them what you need. Just be really honest and sincere about what it is that you want them to do. Okay, those are my don'ts. My to-dos are sort of tied in with those, but I want to cover them quickly. Be an assistant manager. We already talked about that one, but I will add, I have a parenting group on Facebook. It's a private parenting group, but it's open to anyone who has kids in this age range. So you're welcome to join. We have about 10,000 members, and we have a lot of parents who have stayed on well past middle school. So we have experts. And I asked recently to the older parents in the group, what is one thing you would do differently about how you parented your middle schooler? And the number one response, most popular answer was, I would try to fix less and I would listen more. So I would say if you remember only one thing about being an assistant manager, it's listen more, try to fix things less. They need practice fixing anyway, and your job is to be a really good sounding board for them. Avoid the ambush, covered that already. Set up a time to talk. Your child will really appreciate that. And the last one I call Botox brow. It's just sort of a funny name for how I want you to look when you're talking to your child. So I'm going to show you a slide here. This is a photo that was part of an experiment that Deborah Yergel-Todd, who is a neurologist out of Harvard's teaching hospitals, that she used in an experiment where she put adults through an MRI. It's a very small sample size on this, so it's not a great experiment in terms of that, but I think anecdotally, I've been doing this work for 19 years. Anecdotally, this has rung true for most parents I work with. And it is the thing that they tell me is the number one game changer in the conversations they have with their kids at home. So small sample size aside, this really feels like it's accurate and it's sort of mind-blowing. She put adults through an MRI. She showed them this photo and photos of people's faces. And she said, just by looking at this person's face, can you tell me how they feel? And adults in this survey could say 100% of the time that this woman looked afraid. And because they were hooked up to the MRI, she could say, oh, okay, they're engaging their prefrontal cortex to read facial expressions. And then she did the same thing with teens. And she said, can you look at this person's face and tell me how they feel? And half of the teens guessed fear, and half of the teens got it wrong. And the majority answer that they guessed when they got it wrong was she's angry. What this study showed is that, again, the teens were hooked up to an MRI. They were using that amygdala, the emotional center of the brain. The manager was eating a sub in the back of the store, off duty, rewiring. And so they were calling on a different part of the brain to read facial expressions. That's where the amygdala jumps up and says, let me do this for you. Let me be the manager right now. And it's not very good at it. The amygdala is not great at reading facial expressions. I tell you that because you've probably had an experience where you tried to talk to your child about something and you thought you were asking a pretty innocent question, like, hey, I'll take my glasses off so you can really see me for this one. You might be like, hey, how did that math test go? And you're wrinkling your brow. And maybe you're wrinkling your brow because you are 50 years old, or maybe you're wrinkling your brow because this is just your resting face, or maybe you're wrinkling your brow because you think you're being really focused and showing them that you're really paying attention to them. Maybe you're wrinkling your brow because you're like, oh, I want to be nice and ask about that test or whatever it is, but I keep forgetting to send that email for work and I'm trying to keep too many things in my brain at once. For whatever reason, when you have an expression like this and you ask your child a question, hey, how did that math test go? You've probably had your child be like, oh, I don't know. Why are you mad? We haven't even gotten the grades yet. And they storm off and you think, well, that's a great conversation right there, right? That's just misreading this. So it's not that you can't be upset with your kid. It's not that you're not allowed to get mad and model real emotions with them. What I don't want to have happen is for them to misread your facial expression when you really aren't mad and you want to keep talking with them. So the tip is called have a Botox brow. You don't have to actually go get Botox, but I want you to practice having a very neutral expression. What I tell parents is pretend you are a celebrity on a late night talk show and you've gotten so much Botox, you can't have an emotion on your face. I want you to be super neutral when you're talking to them. You can use your words, you can say how you feel, but if you want to keep the door open, and I really think that's our job as parents of tweens and teens, it's to keep the door open for more communication. And if you want to do that, your best bet is not risking that they misinterpret how you're feeling. So it takes a lot of practice. I've been doing this for a really long time. I used to iron my face out like this before I talk to my kids about serious things. But just try really hard. Take a breath again and remind yourself to have a neutral face. You're going to feel weird. You're going to feel like a Stepford parent, like you're too robotic. Your child's going to love it. It's one of the reasons we have our best conversations with tweens and teens, I think, when we're not looking at them. So everyone says, oh, riding in the car, we have our best talks, or texting, we have great conversations over text. It's because they're not seeing this and misunderstanding it. So practice having this Botox brow when you talk to your child. Okay, I want to quickly cover in the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to go to Q&A, a model that I prescribe in this book for how you should change the way that you talk to your child at this age. It's called the BRIEF model. It's an acronym, and each letter stands for a step. So there are 5 steps in this process. It might sound like a lot at first, but the book has scripts. So it takes you through all these scripts and you see exactly how it works. And if you read it enough and you practice it enough, it'll become second nature to you. Your kid's not going to follow the script. That's okay. Don't worry about that. It's really about sort of rebuilding trust in communication at a time when it starts to break down. So B is begin peacefully. A lot of parents think, well, my kid doesn't like talking to me anymore at this age. I know I have to talk to them about drugs or about sex or whatever it may be, and they don't want to listen. So what I will do is I will jump right to the most important information first. And then if they allow me to, I'll backpedal and I'll fit things in. I'll backfill the conversation. That's almost guaranteed to turn your child off and they will walk away. Instead, begin peacefully can sound like this. It can sound like I mentioned earlier, like scheduling a time to talk. It can also sound like sort of disarming them, and you can come at a tough conversation topic neutrally by tipping your toes in. So maybe talking about something you heard on the news or something you saw on a TV show, rather than just saying, hey, we need to talk about X. So those are a couple, taking a deep breath, as I've mentioned a couple times, are really good ways to sort of like, this is just a chit chat. Don't think of it like this is the end all be all of important conversations. This is just a chit chat. We're just going to have a conversation, light. Okay, that's begin peacefully. R is relate to your child. So your child is probably going to be suspicious. They're going to be suspicious that if you want to talk to them about something like drinking, if you want to talk to them about sexual activity or people sending nudes on social media, whatever it is, that the reason you want to do it is you think that they are doing it or their friends are doing it or they're in trouble. So I urge you to have these talks early and often so that they are less inclined to think that. But if you're starting later, that's okay too. You want to disarm them. And so relating to your child can sound like a couple things. It can be like, I know it's awkward to talk about this stuff. I promise you it's going to be really short. And I also want you to know I'm not bringing this up because I'm worried or suspicious. I'm just interested in you and I love you and I have some information that I need you to have. So just very disarming, I think. Okay. I is interview to collect data. This is where you can ask some questions. Don't begin your conversation with, hey, are any of your friends vaping? There's a conversation ender right there. Wait for your questions until you've kind of established this is a peaceful conversation. I'm relating to you. Things are chill here. And then you can begin to ask your questions. But I will say, until you have done this enough that your child sort of understands how the conversation flow works with you, they see on lighter, easier topics that you are not getting highly emotional, that you are not freaking out, those kinds of things. Until that happens, I would keep your questions global in nature. And what I mean by that is this. If you want to talk about vape, for example, and you get to the I and you're like, oh, this is where Michelle said I could ask some questions. Okay, tell me which of your friends are vaping. I need to know. And also it would be helpful if you give me their parents' phone numbers. So no, you're not going to dive into deeply specific things here. When I say keep your questions global in nature, you can ask things like, are they talking about vape in school? Have your teachers ever discussed this with you? What is your understanding of what vape does to your body? Where do kids your age get their information about what vape does to their body? I'm just curious about that. Do you think that vaping is a big deal, or do you think parents are kind of making it a bigger deal than it needs to be? So you're going to ask questions that show your child that they can engage with you without you judging them or their friends, and that it's safe to talk about these kinds of topics with you without you jumping to your fears, right? Those questions that I started with, do any of your friends vape? Have you thought about vaping? You're not going to vape, are you? Are rooted in our fears. So keep your questions more global. E is echo what you hear. And this is, again, sort of like a communications 101. If you have been to a therapist or you have seen a therapist on TV, you know what this sounds like. This is saying, okay, it sounds like you're saying that you understand that vape is serious, and you've even know some kids who've vaped, or you've seen it happen at school, or you have a good understanding of what it does to your body, but you also think that maybe adults freak out a little bit more than they need to. Is that right? And so you double check it with them. You're doing this for two reasons. One, it's nice. It shows that you're really listening. And it gives them a chance, if they've said something and then they think, gosh, that's not what I meant. It gives them a chance to sort of say, no, I'm not saying that. What I meant was this. You're hearing something different. And that's really important, again, to show that you're a really active listener. Also, because there can be huge gaps in vocabulary between teens and tweens and adults at this age. So there are so many things that you think vape means that your child doesn't. You might think that vape means just nicotine, and your child might think it also means smoking pot, or you might think it means, I don't know. But anyway, this is all new territory. So E is a really good, this echo what you hear is a really good opportunity to make sure that you understand things. And your child is the expert here. So you can say, I might be really old school and I don't understand really what vape means. What do you guys think it means? Tell me, because I'm getting my information from CBS News and the people I work with. So I'd rather know from you if I'm right or wrong. So you can ask your kids these questions. Then F is feedback. And this is where I think most parents start. This is that, okay, I'm afraid my kid won't listen to me. I need to tell them not to vape. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to begin by saying, hey, I don't know if you know about vape, but it's really dangerous. And I want you to know why. It does X, Y, and Z. You become highly addicted. People have a hard time getting off of it. I want you to know all of this. When you start there, your child's like, okay, bye, and you don't have a conversation. But when you've gone through the first 4 steps here and you've built that trust, your kid is learning that they can talk to you and you're not going to have a big emotional reaction to hard topics. Then you can say, well, thank you for talking with me about this. I'd love to tell you a little bit about what I know or what I've heard or what my concerns are. And you can tell me what you think about that. And here's your chance to give feedback. It may be that your child at this point in the conversation needs more than feedback. They may need some boundaries. They may need more education. But, in general, it's an opportunity at this point of the conversation where you say, listen, I'm glad we talked. I learned a lot from you. A couple things I want to share about this are 3 points, and I'm going to do them quick, and then we can get a snack or you can go play a game or whatever it is. And then you stop. You do not want these to be long conversations. It spells brief. That's the acronym for a reason. You want to get in and get out pretty quickly, because if your child thinks every conversation with you is like I know it's going to take 30 minutes to an hour and I'm going to get a lecture. It's not a conversation if it's a lecture, and they're not going to be willing to listen to you about the really important stuff. So that is the brief model. We are nearing the end of our hour and getting ready for Q&A. I want to tell you a few ways you can keep in touch with me if you like the stuff that we're talking about here. One is on Instagram. I do a lot of free parenting advice there, and it's just my name, Michelle Eichard, at Michelle Eichard. I have a public Facebook page. It's author and speaker. I get a lot of requests after talks for my private page, and I only accept from people I know in real life. So join me on my public page, and then I will see you here if you want to talk to me directly or ask other parents parenting questions. It's this group called Less Stressed. You have to answer a couple questions to get into the group, and then I let you in, and it's such a good place to bounce things off the community, like, oh my gosh, I found my child vaping. Help, what do I do? We have a lot of experts there, and you can tag me or ask me, and I'm happy to chime in on anything that comes up there. So with that, we are going to move on to Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was very informative. I have kids along the spectrum in ages, so I am definitely taking lots of notes. Thank you for that. Before we dive into the Q&A, let me just share my screen really quickly. Oops, sorry. We would appreciate everyone's feedback tonight, as we do on each of these presentations. Simply point your camera at the QR code that you see on your screen, and it should pop up a link to the survey. It is very, very short. Less than a minute, I promise, but it does really provide us with a lot of valuable feedback in terms of tonight's presentation, as well as things that viewers would like to see in the future. So if you could take a moment to do that, we would appreciate it. We will put this back up at the end of the presentation or at the end of the Q&A. So if you could take your time, and we will also send it in the link along with, send it in the email along with the link to the recording, as well as the tip jar. So anytime you can take it would be greatly appreciated. So at this time, Kathy, I think we have a special guest joining us for Q&A, and I will hand it over to you to get things started.
We do. Thank you, Lisa. So yes, this evening we have a special guest. We have Ellen Morehouse, who is a licensed clinical social worker, credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor, and credentialed prevention professional. Mrs. Morehouse has presented to parents and professional groups, published several articles, has been interviewed by national media, magazines, and outlets, including Good Morning America, PBS, People Magazine, Psychology Today, and Parents Magazine. She's been the recipient of numerous awards and currently is the executive director of Student Assistance Services, a nonprofit organization in Tarrytown, New York. So Ellen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So we have a few questions, and I think what we're going to do is start off with a few, and I may toggle back and forth between Michelle and Ellen. So I'm going to start with one that really caught my attention here. So I'm going to farm this one first out to Michelle, and then of course, Ellen, if you'd like to weigh in with your opinion as well. One of the questions that came in this evening was, our community's culture is to encourage our kids to excel and be the best and participate in everything that they can. travel teens, getting A's on everything that they do. How can we change the paradigm so kids are not feeling so much pressure, even as young as elementary schools?
Great, thank you. I think this is such a good question. I feel it's so timely right now, no matter where you live. We're all feeling this intense increase in pressure. And I think there are a couple things that we can do. Before I tell you what my two things are, there was a study that came out on March 31st from the American Psychological Association that I found fascinating about perfectionism in college kids, so much older, but I think we can sort of track it back. And what they found is that parents who had expectations that felt hard to meet for the kids, those kids ended up with a feeling of socially prescribed perfectionism. And what that means is that they feel that society requires them to be perfect. So we sort of all think like, oh, it's good to have high expectations for our kids. If we do, then they're going to do even better, right? And that's a good thing for them. But I think the key to this is if the child felt the expectations were too high, not if the parent felt, but if the child felt that the expectations were too high, they ended up with this feeling that society requires them to be perfect. And then what you see are kids developing real problems with anxiety and eating disorders and depression. And so we need to take this really seriously. And I think of this analogy of like when we were teaching our kids to swim and we take a step back and take a step back, right? If you are doing that with your child, sort of emotionally and academically and sports-wise and all of this stuff socially, they're not going to pull harder. They're going to sink. They're going to end up with this feeling of not being good enough. So I guess my tips are three. One is be very careful about the expectations you are setting. If your child is giving you signals that it's too hard, then you've got to stop and pull back. The other is opt out. You can be the family who says, you know what, travel sports are not for us. I was that family. I was not interested in that. And I think the other thing that you can do, I say this and people always think it's a joke. My best advice to parents of kids who are in middle school is to get a hobby. If your child feels like they're the center of your universe, you go to every single travel game, all your weekends revolve around them and their activities, it's a ton of pressure for them. But if they see, okay, mom comes to a lot of my swim meets, but sometimes she has painting class and so she can't come, that's great because your child is going to see that you have interests outside of them and that relieves a big burden of perfectionism. So with that, I will toss it over.
Thank you. Good advice. My tips are that parents should make it very clear to their children what are their priorities and state those priorities regularly and frequently. So for example, if the most important thing is for your child to know that you want your child to be healthy, say that. Let me tell you what my expectations are and what's important to me and our family. One is that you're healthy. Two, and this is just an example, that you're a nice person, that you're nice to people, that you don't make fun of people, that you're considerate and kind. Number three, and that might be that you try your best. So if those are your clear expectations, then the pressure that your child will feel is to meet those expectations, to be healthy, to be a good person, and to try their best. Now, if there are other things that are important to your family, let them know that, but let them know where that falls in the priority list. So that makes it much easier when they're a junior in high school or an 8th grader taking their first Regents exam. If being healthy is the number one priority, then you have to go to bed at a certain time because you need a certain amount of sleep as opposed to studying all night to try to get the highest grade.
Great point. Oop, you're on mute, Kathy.
Thank you both so much. Very great advice. So thank you for answering that question. On another note, we have a question that came in. And I think, Michelle, I'll start with you again. How do we as parents, educators, guide our tweens and teenagers who are high functioning on the spectrum or diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, anxiety, ADD, depression, language processing, and tics, deal with peer rejection, social pressures, and how do we help them foster positive friendships while maintaining a positive attitude and developing resilience?
This is so tough. This is tough as adults to watch happen. It's very difficult if you are a child think about that middle school construction project again. If you feel like you are not sort of meeting your peers where they are by and large, that's a really scary and lonely place to be. So I think we have sort of a double-pronged approach here. One is to provide skill building as we're able and as the child is able. So that's a lot of practicing. It's practicing how to talk. It's practicing understanding facial expressions. I mean, that was a broad range of differences and neurodivergencies. So there are lots of opportunities within each of those for practicing skill building. It can be something that you do sometimes, but I think it's even better if they get an opportunity to engage in a group with other kids to practice the social aspect of that. And then in terms of, when I was the question, like if they're made fun of or they're rejected by their peers, then what? My experience in working with kids in this age group has been, sometimes parents say, well, I don't want my child to be labeled, so I don't want them to tell anyone that they are on the autism spectrum or that they have Tourette's or whatever it is. But my experience is when a kid says, this is who I am, this is what I have, and this is how it works. And sometimes it makes me yell, or sometimes it means that I have trouble understanding the joke or whatever it is. Kids are pretty good to be supportive of their peer when they understand. It's when they don't understand why things are happening that things sort of fall apart. So I would say coach your child on how to explain who they are to other people. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do.
And I would agree. I would also add, though, expose your child to activities and opportunities where they can shine, where they can be good. So just for example, an autistic preteen who may not have good social skills may be a star in the robotics club at his middle school. And any kind of structured activity where the main thing isn't to have to speak, but to do an activity. Maybe it's art, maybe it's music, maybe it's a computer game, but something where they can shine and people will start to admire them for some of their qualities as opposed to just their social skills.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Another question that just came in, which is, how should we handle it when our tween tells an obvious lie?
Do you want me to take that one, or do you want to,
Sure.
Ellen, would you like
Go
that
ahead.
one?
You can do it.
I'll say, you can say, you can say if you know that it is, or you can skip right over it and just be like, well, here's where we're getting to. This is, look at what the result, look at what you want. So if your kid says, yeah, I brush my teeth, and you're like, no way, you brushed your teeth, I could tell, right? Doritos all over your teeth. So then you can say, okay, well, it looks like they need a second brushing. So let's go back because I'm still seeing a lot of Doritos on there. So don't get into a battle over whether it's the truth or not, but look at the result you want and focus on that.
Right. Stick to the facts.
Great. Let's see. Another great question that's come in is, how should we approach a community that is permissive with substances when that's not in line with our values?
I'll take that. Okay. I think it's really important to let people know what your values are and the reasons for them. And it's not to be, I know better, but just to say, look, I'm really concerned. It might be because I have alcohol or substance use disorders in my family. So I'm really worried about my child's early use of substances. And that's why I don't want him to be in places where substances are being used. And guess what? There are a lot of other families in our community that have those same issues. So I think we have to make sure that there are other opportunities for our teens or tweens to hang out and have fun without substances. So that would be one way to do it. Another way is say, with so many new substances that are around now, using at this age is really, really dangerous. And did you know? And then give facts. But I wouldn't try to convince a parent that their values are wrong. I would just try to stick to the facts and share your personal experience.
Okay. Michelle, did you want to add anything to that, or?
I mean, I think that's a complete answer. I totally agree.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so next question that came up, these are all great questions. What are age appropriate consequences for a teen when they don't follow the rules, aside from taking away their phone or some other takeaway?
Well, I'll do this one for starters. And what I like to do is I'm not as big of a fan of taking things away because sure, it's a little bit painful. The hope is like, oh, my kid will remember this pain and they won't do this thing again, right? But they're probably not. They're probably gonna be really mad at you and not focusing on what they did wrong, just focusing on how unjust the world is to them. They'll spiral in that for a while. So rather than removing things, unless the infraction was, well, they're doing something really inappropriate with their phone, then for goodness sake, yes, take the phone away. But if they're being, really rude, or if they didn't do their chores or whatever it is, rather than removing things, I like to add things. So I would say like, gosh, you were supposed to unload the dishwasher and you're supposed to do it by a certain time and you didn't. And so rather than take the phone away, I'd be like, this is creating so much extra work for me. So now I need you to unload the dishwasher and you've got to help me cook dinner because I'm going to be behind because I need some of those things. I like adding on responsibility that is related to what they did. That's what I would say.
I agree. I would add, depending on what it is, possibly having to make amends. So if they did something to someone, is there some way they can make up for it? Whether it's to say that they're sorry or do something nice for them or something that's thoughtful.
Yeah, well, a sort of popular thing that I've heard is if they've done something, let's say they're just really defiant towards you and you're arguing with you all the time. And so you're like, what do I do for that? You can just say, you know what, I am exhausted from having this argument and it's taken away my ability to cook dinner. I'm too tired to drive you where you need to go tonight. Whatever it is, you can tie that back into the emotional impact it has on you to be treated so poorly.
Thank you. Let's see, let's take this one on here. Sometimes it's hardest to know how to react or what to say when your child shuts down and has nothing to say. Advice, recommendations? Do you want to start, Ellen?
Sure. I think that when your child doesn't want to speak, there's usually a reason. So I like some of the advice that Michelle gave earlier, like the conversation starter, such as, I was watching this TV show and I saw whatever, what do you think? Or let's talk about what happened, at Thanksgiving. And, Uncle Joe was really drunk, something like that. There has to be, some kind of stimuli for a conversation. But especially with, I'm going to call them silent sons who answer things with, I don't know, or, whatever. It's always helpful to ask what I call scaling questions. So if you start off with, how was your day today? And they go, fine. What did you do? Nothing. Instead, you might want to say something like, on a scale of 0 to 5, with 5 being a great day and 0 being your worst day, how was your day today? Just give me a number. And let's say they say 3 and say, great, what happened today that didn't make it a 5? Well, I got my math test back and, I was hoping, for a B and I got a C+. Okay. Well, what made it better than a 0? Well, it was really fun at lunch. I sat with, John and, we had a great conversation. So a scaling question can help. Another way of doing it is asking them a percent question. So if you wanted to have a conversation about vaping and you say, I just saw a TV show or I read a news article, you can say, just guessing, what % of the 7th graders do you think have ever tried vaping? Just give me a percent. And usually they'll give you a number, okay? Or if they say, I don't know, say, well, just best guess, what do you think? And then they'll give you a number, but that at least starts the conversation and gets words starting to come out of their mouth.
I like that. I think also with kids who, you're right about the silent sons, and I had one. So with kids who are quiet, a couple things that I found to be helpful. One is don't have a verbal conversation. There are other ways to talk. I found that when I switched my conversations with my son to texting, he became far more open. And I think part of it has to do with the face stuff, but also removing the need for your child to respond immediately can be very helpful. So you can say, send a text that says, I'm interested in hearing what you think about X. You don't have to tell me now, but maybe think about it over the next couple, hours, and then shoot me a text back and let me know. That was a really big conversation starter for us, doing it by text. And then I think the other thing is proximity. Your child may not want to talk, but just sitting near them can be really comforting to them. In fact, a lot of kids who I work with will say, when something is wrong with, like, if they're going through drama with their friend, they don't often want to talk to their parent about it, but they want their parent to watch a TV show with them, right? So they're prepared to go through the emotional work of it, but they don't want to feel alone.
I just thought of one other thing to mention. Also, if you're sitting together and you say, how was your day? And they say, fine, and nothing more, you can say, I just want to take a minute and just tell you about my day because I was so upset. And then tell them about something that happened at work or something that happened when you were out for a jog or in the supermarket or whatever. And then tie an emotion to it. And I was so frustrated because the woman in front of me at the supermarket, started to want to put things back and exchange things. And I was online and I needed to get, to school to pick you up. I was so frustrated. And then you can easily say, was there anything that happened today that made you feel frustrated? So you've already shared, something that happened, an incident, and you've tied it to the emotion and named it a frustration. It makes it much easier for them to say, yeah, I got really frustrated because I tried so hard to get a decent grade on that test and I wound up with just a C.
Great. Thank you both. Okay, I'm going to throw this one in there now too, because I think you've both answered it, but someone did ask this question. Will our teen boys ever start talking to us the way they used to before puberty? Will it happen in high school or when they're 30?
I think it happens, the tween boys, I think, start coming back around sophomore year. But that is not a guarantee. It's just kind of a general observation that I've had. Sophomore year, junior year, boys start to know themselves better, and then they are more comfortable talking to you. But it depends, it's kid to kid. And I think the less pressure they feel to be who you need them to be, and the more they feel they can show up exactly as they are, the more likely that will happen sooner rather than later.
I think it will also be more likely to happen if you can start talking with them about things that they're interested in. So just for example, if they're really interested in sports, you might say, well, just for example, who do you think is going to win the playoffs? Or how do you think that game was played? Why do you think that? Or if they're interested in music, it might be something like, what groups do you think are the most popular groups right now? If we're going to be watching, one of the award shows, I want to know at least, who those people are and what kind of music they sing. I know I'm out of it, but I'm your mom, but pick a subject of something that they can tell you about and that they can educate you about. At least you're talking. That begins to show that you care about what they think and how much they know.
Great. Yep. Okay. Screen's doing some funky things. I think it's the weather here. Okay. Another great question that just came in is, how do you give your child advice when they think they know everything? Your advice is wrong, and there's no way you can ever relate to them.
Well, I would say, I don't know how often you're giving advice. So I would say, if you are someone who's like, man, I'm throwing everything at the wall and nothing's sticking, take a break from giving advice for a little while so that your child feels like you are not just an advice machine, and you pretend that your kid is your friend. And if your friend had a problem, would you constantly be saying, well, you know what you need to do, right? I've been there, done that, and I can tell you what you need to do. Tell your boss this, tell your husband this, whatever it is. So just be a listener more than an advice giver for the most part, the majority of your time talking. And then when you are ready to give advice, it probably holds more weight because you've been a really good listener for a while. And so I think what helps is to ask, to say, I think I know something that might be helpful. Is it okay if I share with you some advice and you can take it or leave it, but I think it might be good for you. So that would be my approach.
I think also you can offer your child options as opposed to advice, and say something like, here's some things you just might want to consider, and just think these things over. And that way they have some freedom within boundaries, so to speak. So if it's advice, for example, on how to study, it might be something like, well, here's what I've heard. So here's some possible options. I don't know which one's going to work better for you, but I thought I would just share options that I heard. That makes it a little bit easier to hear. And it gives the adolescent or the tween a little more sense of control, that they get to pick the option as opposed to taking your advice or leaving it.
Great, thank you. Another question that's just come in is, could you talk about letting your child experience failure? What that might look like and when it's appropriate to intervene?
I can, because this is my next book. The whole book is about this. What I would say is that your child should experience failure. Again, it's like, to what degree? It depends on what you're talking about. You do not want to risk their health and their safety. So guardrails around this. But if you know that they want to sing in the talent show and they are the worst, and you're like, I don't know, should I tell them they're terrible to spare them the embarrassment, or should I let them go out there and do it? They can do it. If they want to do it, they want to try. And someone's going to say, but you have a terrible voice. Don't let it come from you. Better that it not come from their parent, probably. So if it's not going to be something that really derails them or endangers them, then it's a good idea for them to experience failure. And what they need when they experience failure is an opportunity to get over it. And so that means probably brainstorming with you, like, yep, I'm so proud that you took that risk. I know you feel like it didn't pay off. You feel like you wish you hadn't done it now, or it wasn't a success like you anticipated. Let's talk about some things that you can do now. So what's your next move? And start to get them brainstorming on what options are post failure, because you don't want them to spiral into something called learned helplessness, where they're just like, well, I guess I'm a failure now, and I guess I can't be successful in this area. And the only thing that overcomes that is experience. So it has to be an opportunity to try something again, not the same thing necessarily, where they have the feeling of success. This is a 6-hour-long answer that I'm trying to get down into 30 seconds.
Yeah, I agree. If it's health and safety, absolutely, you have to prevent them from doing something that's going to impact their health and safety. But failure can also be a driver of grit and working harder. And I think everyone knows the story of how Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, didn't make, whether it was his high school team or one of his teams, and then went on to be a fabulous basketball player. So let them see, what they're good at, what they're not good at. And if they really have the motivation, maybe they will develop, the skills to sing. Some people think that you can teach musical ability. Some people think that if you work hard enough and have great coaching, your athletic skills will improve, or artistic skills. So let them try anything. Okay. Don't be the one to tell them, I don't think you can do that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you both. We have a few more questions, and we do have some more time, so I'm going to continue on. How to tackle conversations that are going to rile up your teen?
Schedule them. I'm back to that. Schedule them. Say, I want to talk to you about something that is, I'm a little bit nervous about. I myself am a little bit nervous about talking about it. And so, can we set aside 15 minutes after dinner to have a conversation, or would you rather talk about it over the weekend and we can go on a walk? Tell me what you prefer. because it's something that we need to discuss.
And I think just to remember that timing is everything. And let's pretend you do schedule that conversation for 7:45. And then 7:45 comes along and you see that your son and daughter is just incredibly frazzled because they thought they'd have all their homework done by then, but they don't. It's okay to say, I wanted to talk to you, but I can see you're really frazzled. So why don't we reschedule for tomorrow? So be willing to be flexible.
I love that.
Okay, great. Flexibility is key.
Right.
All righty. Another question that just came in was, how do I know if my 14-year-old son has depression? He doesn't come out of his room only to eat, and I'm convinced COVID has affected him tremendously. He doesn't like to talk to me anymore.
I'll tackle that first if it's okay. So there is an increase in anxiety and depression as a result of COVID. So I don't want to brush this off, but certainly I think many parents are afraid to ask, but just to say, how are you feeling these days? I've been reading a lot in the paper, and I know that a lot of, young people your age are struggling. And I'm just curious, how has COVID or being at home or being back at school affected you? And just see what they say. If you think it's depression, don't be afraid to say, is there anything you're sad about? Are you feeling sad? And they might say, I'm not sad. I just, don't have energy, or I don't feel like eating, or I'm having a hard time sleeping. I think if you hear something from your teenager where they're not feeling like themselves or they're feeling different, number one is get your child to their pediatrician or adolescent medicine doctor for a physical, because we know that many times physical changes in adolescence, such as changes in thyroid or other biological conditions, can really impact mood and behavior. So you want to rule all of that out first. And then certainly look at things like changes in eating, changes in sleeping, changes in activities, changes in friends, but changes, and talking with them. And even not being afraid to say, are you happy with yourself? Are you happy with the way things are? And if they say no, say, well, maybe we can talk to somebody about things that we can do for things to be better for you. Do it that way. I really don't think parents should say, well, maybe you need to see a therapist, because that implies that you're sick.
Mm-hmm.
And many, especially middle schoolers, don't want to feel that they're sick at a time they need to be independent. They need to be powerful and healthy. But they are usually open to a coach because they're familiar with a coach. So the idea of maybe we could talk to someone, get some coaching, how to feel better. I think they might be more open to that.
Yeah, and I would add two other things to look for is if your child is in a slump that they don't come out of, that's one thing. But if your child is on a roller coaster and they are in their room for a few days and then they're like, fine for a few days, and then they're weepy, and then they're not. That's like what a lot of our own adolescents were like. It's very emotional that time. So you want to look for when there aren't peaks and valleys. It's just sort of a low valley. And the other thing to watch for in boys in particular is that depression doesn't always look like sadness and lack of eating. In boys, we really see a lot of anger when a boy is going through depression. So outbursts are very common. So you may just think like, well, he's not depressed, he's rude, right? But that could be an indicator too.
Okay, great. Thank you. We've had many wonderful questions come in, and I think we can just have maybe one more question, and then we're getting closer to our time. So there was a question that came in that is, what advice, I'm sorry, I grabbed the wrong question here, did I? Yes, what advice can you give your teen who has a very, very hard time fitting into one friend group? She's been bullied and had to leave one school and just seems to struggle with navigating friendships.
May I start with that one?
Sure.
I think it's so important for children, tweens, teenagers to have the opportunity to be in many different groups of peers. So if they go to school in one school district, maybe they can go to religious instruction in another school district and summer camp in another, or take ballet lessons in a fourth community. So they have many different opportunities. Also, there are some activities that are more supportive of differences than others. So religious education, scouting, volunteer activities, those kind, WISE, community centers, activities where there are professionals to really make sure that there's not as much meanness as in competitive activities can be a really good way to do that.
The two activities that I hear a lot from the parents I work with for this kind of inclusiveness are drama, theater programs, I love, and also band. So if either of those appeal to your kid, they have a reputation for being places where kids who feel like they're on the fringe are more accepted. And I love that. I say to kids all the time, don't put all your friendship eggs in one basket, because then if something goes wrong, there's like egg yolk over all of you. And so divvy it up and go to lots of different places. And again, you may want to explore whether or not this is a child who could benefit from some social skills coaching.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm just going to quickly throw up the QR code again for taking our survey. We have come to the end of our time together, and we would appreciate it if you would take the survey. Thank you again, Michelle and Ellen, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. It was very helpful and very insightful. And thank you to everybody out there for taking the time to join us tonight. Be sure to visit our website over the summer to see what's in store for 22-23. We wish everyone a great summer and end of school year, and have a very good evening. Thank you so much.